The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to Bronxtalk. When he was elected to the City Council at the age of 25, tonight's guest became New York City's youngest elected official and the first openly LGBTQ person elected to office in the borough of the Bronx. He has since moved on to the U.S. Congress, succeeding Jose Serrano in the 15th Congressional District. And we have a lot to talk with him tonight, including his latest concerns about the Russian embassy in Riverdale, infrastructure funding, how he plans to handle his reformatted district, and much more. It is nice once again to see the congressman in the 15th Congressional District. As a matter of fact, the only congressional district that is located completely in the Bronx. Nice to see you, Congressman Ritchie Torres.
Always a pleasure to see you, Gary.
Let's get started. This week, you had a press conference based on a letter you sent to the FBI and the DOJ asking for an investigation into the Russian diplomatic compound, which is just up there in Riverdale, looking for any potential espionage activities going on there. Why did you do it? What are your concerns? And do you think that the FBI and DOJ is ready to respond to a letter like that?
Gary, it's a pleasure to be with you. I've spent most of my time in D.C., where the situation in Ukraine has weighed heavily on us. We in Congress are appalled by Vladimir Putin's unprovoked war of aggression against Ukraine, his war crimes against the Ukrainian people, and we cannot afford to have the war crimes of Vladimir Putin aided and abetted by espionage in our own backyard. There have long been reports about espionage at the Russian diplomatic compound. According to Robert Schreck, who is a former member of the FBI's military intelligence squad, who has actually been in the compound, he indicates that it's an open secret that there are elements of Russia's military and foreign intelligence service who either live near or in the Russian diplomatic compound. Back in 2015, the Southern District for New York convicted Evgeny Barakov of conspiring on U.S. soil to act as an agent of the Russian Federation. Mr. Barakov lived near the Russian diplomatic compound in Riverdale. Back in March of 2018, the U.S. government revealed that there are more than 100 Russian diplomats disguised as spies on U.S. soil, which raises the question, how many of those spies might live near or in the Russian diplomatic compound? So these are answers to which we've never been given clear answers. And so I'm calling on the FBI to investigate these allegations of espionage.
Did you get a response from them yet, or is it one of those things you'll just kind of hope for the best? Are there, others of your colleagues who support the notion?
It takes agencies a few weeks to respond, and it could be the case that the FBI offers a classified briefing. But to my knowledge, no federal official has ever requested an FBI investigation into the allegations of espionage at the Russian diplomatic compound.
Do you think if this were to go through, Vladimir Putin and the Russians probably would respond in some ways? Do you think they would then work harder to expel U.S. spies or other intelligence officials? And as a result, we'd lose kind of an important strategy information source that we would use in any number of ways in the war and elsewhere when it comes to Russia.
Well, by that logic, we would never expel any spy.
That's true.
We have a legal obligation to expose espionage wherever it exists and to expel espionage wherever it's been exposed. It's a violation of federal law. Federal law requires agents of foreign governments to register with the Attorney General of the United States. It is illegal to conduct espionage operations in the American homeland. And it's more important than ever given the egregious war crimes of the Putin regime.
In terms of the war itself, there's a lot of talk now that Putin, who's backed into somewhat of a corner because it hasn't gone as well as he expected, that he might consider employing chemical or biological weapons or, God forbid, even nuclear weapons. What do you think? What should the U.S. do if that actually comes to pass?
These are terrifying times. The Russian invasion of Ukraine is the largest invasion since World War II. And it feels like we're as close to a third world war as we've ever been. I've never lived in a time where a foreign leader has openly mused about using nuclear weapons. My view is that we have to do everything we can to hold Putin accountable and to support the Ukrainian people without provoking a wider war. If Putin were to use either chemical or biological or nuclear weapons against the Ukrainian people, then we would have to respond with even more severe sanctions. So far, the sanctions that we have imposed are the harshest in history, causing Russia's currency and stock market and banking system and economy to come crashing down. But if Russia were to use weapons of mass destruction, then we would have to impose secondary sanctions not only on Russia, but on countries that do business with Russia, such as China. That would be a line that should never be crossed.
And that would also, the threat of World War III in that case would be squarely on the table. Do you think President Biden acted a little too slowly, that once they amassed that force around the border of Ukraine, that maybe some other kind, maybe impose the economic sanctions earlier or take some other action before, the president didn't want to do anything until they actually started a war. Do you think that was, in hindsight, maybe bad error in judgment?
Quite the opposite. I feel like President Biden has handled the situation as well as he could, because only President Biden could build the kind of multilateral coalition that we've seen. And the president has been raising the alarm about the threat of a Russian invasion back in December. And there were people who were dismissive. And his intelligence, his predictions have been shown to be correct. So the president is taking the right approach. Putin made two miscalculations. He made a miscalculation in underestimating the full extent of Ukrainian resistance, the Ukrainian will to fight. The Ukrainian resistance has been much stronger than Putin had anticipated, and the Russian army is much weaker than he thought it would be. But he also made a miscalculation in underestimating the unity of the West. He never expected Europe and the United States to come together so strongly and to impose the harshest sanctions in history. So he's been blindsided.
We should mention, which I did not mention earlier, you are the vice chair of the House Committee on Homeland Security. Are you concerned about the security of the U.S. in all of this, that if something escalates, that something will come our way? And what is the dialogue like on that committee right now?
Well, I cannot obviously disclose classified briefings.
I'm trying.
Here's what worries me. So, in my view, the risk of a nuclear war, although it's higher than ever, it's still highly improbable. What is far more probable is the threat of a cyber attack, the threat of cyber retaliation. Russia is a superpower in cyberspace. It has a demonstrated ability to compromise the computer systems that operate our critical infrastructure, that operate our water systems and energy systems, and all the systems that we depend on every day. You might remember Colonial Pipeline. It was a Russian cyber gang that broke into Colonial Pipeline, which was responsible for about half of the gasoline that is sent to the Northeast. So that's what I worry about, is a cyber attack that destabilizes the critical infrastructure that everyday Americans depend on.
And I think the president has made it quite clear that, in other words, warning and reminding all levels of cybersecurity to be on alert right now. Congressman, you introduced the Reveal Risky Business in Russia Act. Let's talk about that, why you introduced it, and have there been or have you seen the kind of response from colleagues to push this through?
Well, about a week ago, President Zelensky spoke to a joint session of Congress. It was the first time a foreign leader had delivered an address before a joint session from a war zone. And during his address, he called upon every American company to stop doing business in Russia and to stop financing Putin's war machine against the Ukrainian people. And so in response to Zelensky's impassioned plea, I introduced the Reveal Risky Business in Russia Act, which would require every publicly traded corporation to disclose their business dealings and operations in Russia. We have to name and shame every corporation that's aiding and abetting Putin's invasion of Ukraine.
Do you suspect that there are many still untold, and that there's still commerce going back and forth between American companies and Russia?
Well, we know that Subway has 450 locations in Russia. We know that Papa John's, the franchise, insists on operating in Russia, and it's been renamed Papa Putin, so it's suffered reputationally from its decision to remain in Russia. The Yale School of Management has been tracking which corporations have withdrawn from Russia and which corporations continue to do business there. And there are a number of corporations that are digging in, that refuse to withdraw their operations from Russia.
Have there been colleagues supporting the notion? I mean, obviously, for a bill like that to pass, you're going to need some help.
I'm confident that we're going to build broad support because there's been a bipartisan consensus in favor of holding Russia accountable. We have to send a simple message that if you invade a sovereign nation state, the governments and the corporations of the free world will hold you accountable.
Do you think that the boycotting Russian businesses by Americans, especially if they're small businesses, let's say they provide Russian food or something like that, it would hurt American citizens as well? Let me just interject one more thing. There was a lot of talk about Russian vodka, and so people were pouring it out or not buying it, and companies that said, "Hey, we're fully American, you're hurting us." So, is there some concern there that, and nobody certainly wants to hurt American businesses or Americans who run businesses?
And I just want to be clear: when we speak of Russian businesses, we're referring not to businesses here in the United States. Russians here in the United States should be respected as our fellow Americans. We're referring to businesses in Putin's Russia. Look, whether we like it or not, the United States is the leader of the free world. We have to enforce international law. We have to enforce the principle of state sovereignty, that we cannot live in a world where the borders of independent nation states can be redrawn by military force. And if there are countries like Russia that violate international law, we have to hold them accountable. And sanctions is how we hold those countries accountable. And it is true that sometimes those sanctions come at our own expense, but that's the burden we bear as the leader of the free world and as the enforcer of international law.
Congressman, let's bring it home and talk about our home borough of the Bronx. You secured $10.1 million for 9 community-funded projects in your district. And that was part of the latest government funding package. I want to extend the question about infrastructure monies. Do you know how much you can anticipate the 15th congressional district getting, and what is the process by which the projects are going to be selected? Can organizations reach out? I mean, how is it going to work?
So for the first time in a decade, Congress is bringing back what have historically been referred to as earmarks that have been renamed community-funded projects. The process is far more transparent. And in the latest appropriations bill, I secured millions of dollars for parks, for healthcare providers, for community centers, for cultural institutions like Pregones Theater, for libraries like the Sedgwick Library. And so these are the public institutions that enrich the Bronx. As far as the number of dollars that will flow specifically in the South Bronx, it's hard to say because some of these dollars are distributed at the discretion of state and local governments. So we did pass the bipartisan infrastructure framework, which was more than $1 trillion, but we often leave it to state and local governments to distribute those dollars.
Do you anticipate a time lag? Do you know when those dollars will be good?
It will vary depending on the agency. There are some agencies that are more efficient than others. It was true when
I meant in terms of having it allocated to you to move it around.
So it's never allocated. So we put it in the budget. We passed the appropriations bill. And so now the burden falls on the agencies to allocate the dollars to the organizations or to the government agencies that are set to receive those dollars.
In this the last redistricting process that we went through, your district, the 15th district, was one of those that had significant change. We have a map. We can put up the map to kind of compare the way it is now versus the way it's going to be. So the biggest change, as far as I could tell, is a section of High Bridge was taken away, and of course you added that whole Northwest Bronx area. What are your thoughts about it? What are the challenges for you to who have been representing largely that bulk in the South Bronx? What are the challenges for you in kind of dealing with this radically changed borderline?
So as you know, I have no role in the drawing of my lines. It's a process that's dictated by the state legislature in accordance with the state constitution. I have no choice but to play the cards that I'm dealt. I'm confident in my ability to represent people from every corner of the Bronx. I'm going to fight my heart out for the people of the South Bronx, Norwood, Hallam Parkway North, and Riverdale. I look forward to representing all of them. And I feel like I'm more than capable of representing a diversity of constituencies.
People in the South Bronx are concerned. They say, well, you know what, the income level, the median income level in Riverdale is $62,000 compared to the $25,000 median income level in Mott Haven. The needs may be sucked out of the South Bronx because there's greater attention paid to the North Bronx, and losing, extra care for health indicators, asthma, gentrification concerns, all those kinds of things. What do you say to those people who say, you know what, we're tired of not getting and having it go somewhere else?
Yeah. And that critique is based on a misunderstanding about the workings of federal funding. So there's no federal program that's based on congressional lines. Congressional lines determine, which voters can vote for which congressional candidates. But most funding is based on need. So if you have a school in the South Bronx that continues to have a majority of students who qualify for free or reduced lunch, then they're going to continue to receive the same level of funding that they would have regardless of the congressional lines. Most federal funding programs are based on need or federal formula that have nothing to do with congressional lines. Congressional lines only affect electoral politics, not governing.
The Twin Parks fire in your district really opened a lot of people's eyes. A lot of people said, you know what, this is not just one building, this is an epidemic of sorts. You then introduced legislation to empower the U.S. Fire Administration to help local firefighters in investigating deadly fires like that and coming up with recommendations for fire prevention. Why don't you just give us an idea of what you think happened there and how what you're suggesting might improve the situation so that, of course, we avoid as much of that as possible in the future.
Well, as you know, here in the Bronx, the 4 deadliest fires in the past 3 decades have all been in the Bronx. New York City's 4 deadly. And one of them is the calamitous fire at Twin Parks Northwest. And that's not an accident. That's a consequence of systemic this investment. In the case of Twin Forks Northwest, a malfunctioning space heater started the fire, and the front door and the stairwell doors were both left open, causing the smoke to spread so widely and rapidly that 18 victims died from severe smoke inhalation from cardiac arrest. And so there are a few lessons learned that we have to apply. Number one, we have to require space heaters to have automatic shut-offs so that it can no longer be as much of a fire hazard. Two, we have to require that these doors be automatically self-closing. And if landlords fail to install self-closing doors, we have to suspend their Section 8 payments. Third, we have to create a process for federal investigations into local fires. So that's why I introduced legislation that would empower the U.S. Fire Administration to conduct investigations. These are the steps that we have to take to ensure safety. And then we have to ask ourselves, why are people using these space heaters in the first place? It's because of the inadequacy of heat and hot water. And so I have legislation that would require these apartments to have heat sensors, which would enable state and local agencies to monitor heat and hot water levels in real time.
Over the course of time, and I've been sitting in this seat for decades, literally, the ongoing discussion is the number of investigators to be able to go through buildings. You talk about the very simple act of making sure there are strong, I know I have it in my building, strong enough springs that will close the doors behind people who walk through there. But we have so many buildings, and so many of them have not been kept up. Is this simply a funding issue? I mean, you were, of course, involved in New York City public housing with the city council. How do we get enough? It's a simple act. You get enough people to go through buildings, you can inspect them all.
Well, keep in mind, if you live in a luxury building, then you can be almost assured of a self-closing door. So it's a problem that disproportionately affects the lowest income buildings. And there is a local mandate for self-closing doors, but there's no real enforcement mechanism.
That's my point, yes.
But that's why we need federal intervention, because if we were to tell landlords, if you fail to install self-closing doors, we are going to suspend your Section 8 payment. We're going to hit it where it hurts, which is in your wallet. I guarantee we're going to have much more compliance.
Congressman, obviously moving from the City Council into the U.S. Congress requires a different vision. We've heard some of that vision from you this evening, and we appreciate it. But also the level of politics. Of course, in the Bronx, we don't have a Republican elected official, and you sit in the same Congress with many Republicans. Right now, there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of talk that the Democrats will lose the House. Are you concerned that the tide would change? And certainly, if you look at all the things that the House of Representatives did over, during the time that you've been in office, you probably wouldn't be able to do a lot of those things. What are your thoughts?
Look, it's hard to tell. I am confident that we're going to do much better than people seem to think we will do. Keep in mind that the number of genuinely competitive seats is vanishingly small. It has shrunk over time. And so no matter who's in charge of Congress, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, the majority is likely to be thin. It's only going to be controlled by a few seats. But we do have a fighting chance of holding on to the majority. And our country depends on it. The social safety net depends on it. We would be poorly served in the Bronx by a Republican takeover of the House of Representatives.
Do you feel that Democrats are sufficiently unified? It's been a criticism all along over, let's say, the last half dozen years that there's a progressive wing. Obviously, the Republicans are using that as a hammer. Doesn't matter who speaks. If they're on the Democratic side, they call them liberal and use terms like woke and all these other things and label every Democrat like that. Are Democrats sufficiently unified to get past that and present as unified a presentation to America?
The Democratic Party is as unified as it's ever been in the history of the United States. Almost every Democrat voted for the American Rescue Plan, which led to a strong recovery from COVID-19, the strongest wage growth, the strongest economic growth, the strongest employment growth since the 1980s. Almost every Democrat voted for the bipartisan infrastructure framework, which was the largest investment in physical infrastructure in more than half a century. And almost every Democrat voted for the Build Back Better Act, which would have been the largest investment in the social and human infrastructure of the United States. Of course, our challenge is two senators, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, but the overwhelming majority of Democrats are united around a progressive vision.
Congressman, one of the issues that they bring up, and it was brought up even in the Supreme Court hearings, is the notion of crime. And unfortunately, Bronx numbers are not encouraging. City numbers are not encouraging. I mean, we don't have anywhere near enough time to go through it. But in general, how should the new mayor, the new police commissioner take a look at crime?
Well, first, it must be said that most Democrats are in favor of reforming rather than defunding the police. I've said publicly that defund police in New York City is dead and good riddance. But we have to keep in mind that the majority of guns recovered in New York City are coming from the South, are traveling through the iron pipeline. And so the federal government has to play a much more aggressive role in interrupting the iron pipeline that has led to an explosion of guns on the streets of New York. We are seeing more guns flowing on the streets than ever before, and that's the heart of the problem.
Do you see, and you've already put your money where your mouth is, so to speak, and in providing more funds for social services to young people, funding community centers, et cetera. Do you see that as one of the ways to deal with crime as well? It's something that I've advocated for a long time on this program, so I can't deny that.
Policing can only address violence in the short term, but it takes social investment to address the root causes of violence in the long run. When you systematically starve a community of opportunities and resources, it becomes a breeding ground for gang recruitment and gang membership and ultimately gang violence. So we have to create an alternative for our young people. We have to invest in more youth employment, in more youth programming, and that's part of the logic of the Build Back Better Act. The Build Back Better Act did include $5 billion for cure violence, recruiting former gang members to reach out to young people and steer them away from gang membership.
Congressman Ritchie Torres, thank you so much for your time. I know it's a busy day, and you carved out some time to spend it with me and with the people of the Bronx, and we appreciate your time this evening. And good luck, and let's hope things settle down in Washington and across the world so we can have a different sort of dialogue in the future.
I hope so. Take care.
Thank you so much. All right, folks, that is it. We thank the Congressman for joining us. And, of course, we thank our producers, Rebecca Hemick and Stephen Powell. And our director is Benaiah War. And you know what will happen? Oh, next week we're going to talk very local, hyper-local. We're going to talk about some of the advocates who are envisioning a new future for the Bronx.